Species.
I've had a momentous occasion in my life. I feel like in the same way that we divide history into BC and AD, my life can now be divided into pre and post, finding out about young gravy.
Welcome to Origin of Species. My name is Scott. I'm here with Steve, as always. All right, Steve, young gravy.
Young gravy.
Spill the gravy. Who the heck is that?
So, a few weekends ago, kicking around on the weekend, want to see who's performing at the National, our preferred music venue here in the Richmond, Virginia area. And I came across a picture of a young man who goes by the name of Young Gravy. And young spelt without an O.
Oh.
Y-U-N-G.
Okay.
And if you see the picture that's on his Spotify, it's an intriguing picture. And I will show it to you. I know
Please.
There's nothing better than showing pictures.
I have an image in my mind of what this guy might look like. So, okay.
Yeah.
He's way wider than I had imagined.
So he looks like if you crossed Christopher Cross and a 70s era pimp into one person. And I made the mistake of listening to some of his music. And the best way I can describe it is, have you ever smelled something that's so terrible that all you want to do is have other people smell it and then you can't stop smelling it?
Yes.
It doesn't happen that often.
Right.
But this is what's happened to me.
You're getting the young gravy stink on everyone.
The young gravy stink.
Look at this guy. So is he doing? I don't even know if I want to know more.
You don't want to know.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna still talk about it. And I feel like also like I'm contaminating people with the smell.
He looks like, who's that guy that wore the gold teeth and
Well, and I think that's what the difference is for him. So that was
Riff-Raff.
Riff-Raff.
But
so
like a little bit younger and douchier.
Well, but that, I think Riff-Raff, and I'm ashamed I know who that is also, I think actually thinks he's a rapper, or he's not, there's not as much of a joke.
So Young Gravy's being like in on the joke.
Well, many years ago, last season we discussed the term kayfabe, which came from professional wrestling,
right,
where a professional wrestler would basically stay in his character and kept the integrity of the character.
Right.
And what he's done, and I think a lot of good comedy does this too, is this guy whose name is Matt. I believe he's from Minnesota, and I've seen him without his sunglasses. He looks like generic white guy from Wisconsin.
Right.
Basically stays in his character and does, I guess it's hip-hop music, or he's a rapper, and I believe the genre, as I'm starting to learn, is trap music. And
You're just now learning about what trap music is.
Which means it's probably washed up now. That if I've said it out loud,
you've said a lot of things.
I just killed it.
You know, because what's great is you'll and we both do this where we'll say like, well, I'm old because this.
Yeah.
But like that's the thing that just made you sound older than you ever have.
Because
you're like, this thing I'm learning about, it's called trap music.
And this is now all those times I made fun of my parents. It has now come full circle.
Well, but in a way, I mean, I don't know. It's I kind of wish I didn't know what trap music was.
If I had if I produced a sitcom, it would have a very special episode about the dangers of trap music would be coming out.
It would
about
be called
this time.
It's a Trap.
Yeah. So, but again, Young Gravy. Then I spent the rest of the morning anger listening to Young Gravy.
Is it so? I can see myself like 20 years ago thinking this was funny because I don't mind a good parody, But
that's the genius of it. There's no winking at you.
I see what you're saying.
He stays in his character.
Well, Wheeler Walker Jr., who don't listen unless you're ready to be offended, and like Steel Panther and those guys. I mean, they do it for so that's the country. And
there's some winking at you.
Okay, so this guy is. But so how do you know he's not legit then? Have you just done your research?
There's no way a white guy named Matt from Minnesota can say these things, including songs about how he was buying groceries at the grocery
I see what
store.
you're saying. There is a difference. Like Wheeler Walker Jr. and Steel Panther are clearly trying to be funny.
Yeah.
This guy is staying completely,
and he's staying in character and doing.
Right.
I don't know what good.
But there's no organic way that he is this guy.
Right.
I mean, this is a character.
Anyone that describes in a song going to the grocery store, having relations with his dentist at the grocery store, which is termed as "she wanted to give me the business."
Yeah.
Like he's Wally Cleaver, but saying it all with a straight face.
All right, you're starting to win me over. Actually,
I know, but don't listen to it.
I'm not going to. I've got enough guilty pleasures in my life that I don't need Young Gravy in my life.
No one listen to Young Gravy.
All right, so let me ask you a question, Steve. I'm gonna. It's Young Gravy may be one of the worst people of all time. He may not be. I don't know. But if you had to name the most perfect man in history. And there's a reason I'm asking you this, sure. I'll bring around later. Well, do you have any ideas, any names pop into your head?
That's simple. And anyone who knows me knows this shouldn't be a surprise. President Barack Obama.
Wait, why am I laughing? You're right.
I don't understand what's so funny about that.
I thought you were going to, because I thought your answer was going to be Ric Flair, but no, you went with.
No, I'm going. Okay. So one of the things I like about Barack Obama, and before I talk about and extol all his virtues, I encourage anyone who doesn't think I'm serious about that to go to Speakseas.com/animals to see the inspirational quote that I've listed from President Barack Obama for my upcoming podcast, Animals That Suck.
I can't wait for Animals That Suck. The buzz
is one of the reasons that I decided to do this was Barack Obama. And
he's inspirational.
I think one of the things that gets overlooked about his presidency is there's a lot of attention is spent on how he is our first black president.
Yeah.
But what is overlooked a lot is he's also our first Hawaiian president.
That's a good point.
You never hear that. That aspect of his personality doesn't get pushed a lot. And I think it was to his disadvantage. I think he should have, once he was in office, really embraced who he was as a Hawaiian.
He did not put out the Hawaiian vibe, but you're right. He's from...
And, I mean, it could have just changed the way that some people perceived him. I mean, think about, I can just picture myself watching a Fox News show, and someone would say something, say what you will about Barack Obama, but the man knows how to handle a surfboard. There's just a whole other aspect of him that could be... could be used.
That's right. Unlike John, was it John Kerry that was out there on the wakeboard or whatever it was, or that? Yeah, no, but and I think that too. There were so many possibilities that we missed. Like he could have. You know how normally they sign off. The presidents will sign off with "God Bless America."
Yeah,
he could have signed off with "Aloha means goodbye" or some. One of those sports
He could have had Don Ho come out from behind him and play ukulele and walk him off.
Oh my gosh.
And he could just go off to the side and eat pineapples.
Man, hindsight is 20/20. So you're going with Barack Obama. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
It's not a bad answer. It's a really good answer. Yeah. So, the first idiom we're going to do today is we're going to do Apple themed idioms.
Awesome.
Why? I don't know. I just wanted to do this first one, and then things went from there. So, one of the phrases that I've heard throughout my life that I did not know what it meant until I researched it was the apple of my eye.
Apple of my eye.
So it's something that you hear in, people talking about, like maybe their kid or their loved one. You're the apple of my eye, and it's kind of conjures up an image. What about you? Is that one you've heard, and what do you think about when you hear that one?
I've heard it a lot. I don't know how often I've used it. But it's something that maybe I've almost seen written down, or other people have used it to describe it. So when I hear that, I think of someone that you put on a pedestal, and I would think almost probably in a romantic way, like it's you would discuss your wife as being the apple of your eye, or maybe your preferred child. Yeah,
there's also I was debating on whether or not to even bring this up. But since we talked about Young Gravy, Apple of My Eye is in the news right now, which I didn't know. But apparently there's a Rick Ross song called Apple of My Eye. Now, do you know about Rick Ross?
I've heard the name before.
All right, so he's a rapper, and
Does he play trap music?
He does, actually.
Okay.
And he uses trap beats, and I do know a lot. Actually, how much should I say here? I really enjoy a couple of his albums. I actually like Rick Ross. But he's you might like him as far as just his story, because he used to be a corrections officer. And he's a big fat guy. Like, have you seen his picture? He's the guy, he like shirtless.
It's coming back to me. Yeah. But he's pretty out there and proud.
But
he has a very body positive image of himself, despite maybe having a non-traditional build.
Yeah, exactly that. So, but he used to be a corrections officer, but then he raps about drug dealing and all this other stuff, which he never did, and a lot of rappers never did it. But he's created this whole.
I don't think Young Gravy did.
Yeah. So in some ways he is like Young Gravy in that, but it's like accepted. People still dig his music. Like he still has cred because of being, I guess, a good rapper. But it's weird though how he doesn't get called out as a charlatan, because he's just like, this is my character. Rick Ross is this guy that does all these things. Anyway, way more Rick Ross talk than I thought there was going to be tonight. But
again, I blame Young Gravy.
We
live in a post Young Gravy world now.
We live in a post Young Gravy episode for sure, because this was not something I even knew if I was going to bring up. But Rick Ross has a beef with Nicki Minaj, and he has a diss track called "Apple of My Eye," and that's about the extent of what I know about it. But I read some stuff, and it's not like the rap industry, as I've said before, to diss each other, but they're making an exception. They're making an exception here with this one. So that popped into the news feed. That's the whole story there. But what did you think that meant growing up? Did you just not think about it, or?
I just in my mind pictured like an apple on a pedestal, a very shiny apple. And as you know, I'm not very pro fruit. But apples are one of the fruits that I like. Apple pies. I like those Hostess apple pies. I like even the McDonald's one that has the apple at like the lava temperature.
Yeah, I was gonna say
that you have to like open and then take 4 steps away from.
Right. So that thing has 2 temperatures. It's like me tanning. It's like I'm either bright red and burnt, and then I'm white again. It's like the thing is 1,000,000 degrees or it's cold.
Yeah. But basically, it's a fruit I approve of, because it can be put in dessert form fairly easily.
So you're hitting on part of where people think it may have come from, which is, hey, apples are a treat. Apples are something. If you go back to our hunter-gatherer days, which the more I've read up on this, the more we were really gatherers more than we were hunters. Back at Homo sapiens early days, right? And so an apple was something that was precious. So you could say, well, there you go. Now, I thought this was one that was biblical in origin, and I'm pretty close to that. So it's found in the Bible a lot.
Okay.
And I won't read all these, but basically, like Proverbs 7:2 is a big one, where it says, "Keep my commandments and live, and my law as the apple of thine eye." Okay. So when I would read these things, and it goes on, there are about 5 or 6 references, but trust me, it's scattered throughout the Bible. So we know this has been around a while, so it'd be easy to say, well, this came from the Bible. Shakespeare uses it also in A Midsummer Night's Dream, where he says, "Flower of this purple dye, hit with Cupid's archery, sink in apple of his eye." And so in that sense, he's coupling it there with Cupid. So it's going to what you were talking about.
Young Gravy?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure there's a young Cupid out there, or a little Cupid, but Cupid Shuffle, there is one, because that's the guy's name, I think, for the Cupid Shuffle. So there you go.
There we go.
So it does have that connotation for lovers, but where did that come from? So this is really cool. There are a couple reasons why this came about. One is before we had all this knowledge of medicine and we knew the anatomy of man as we do now, the thought was that the eye, the pupil of the eye, was actually round. And so it was like a little marble in there, as opposed to what it actually is. So the closest thing, they had back then to circles was like fruit. So an apple. So they actually called that, as like part of your anatomy, the apple of your eye was your pupil. It was that black little marble in there, was the apple.
So not a lot of citrus back then either, because that's not the most round fruit I can think of.
It's not it depends on which apple you're talking about. So, but that's because I thought the same thing when they said that's like, why wouldn't they call it the orange of the eye?
Yeah.
But no, they referred to it as the apple. They thought it was a solid object, and it is more common than an orange. So the apple is probably the most common, just universal sort of roundish thing out there. So, okay, well, that gets us the half there. The other part is that sight was in itself a very precious thing. I mean, when they didn't have eye doctors and, did you have a condescending eye doctor? I think we had that conversation. But you didn't have all that. So your sight was very precious. So in one sense, having the apple of your eye, thinking about the apple of your eye as your pupil is your eyesight. That is something very precious. So you could call something, keep me like the apple of your eye. Keep me as, so in the Bible, a lot of times they say, keep my commandments and law as the apple of thine eye. So in the way that you would protect that, it doesn't get to the lover part though. Another reason that we think people started using this in this way with the Cupid deal and you would call your loved one, maybe your wife, the apple of your eye, is the fact that if you look at somebody very close, you see the reflection in your eye, right? So in the apple of your eye, which is what they called it, you would see the reflection of your loved one. So you say, you're the apple of my eye. You're what I see. Well, that's kind of weird because you see yourself back, but it's a way to see the reflection in someone that you love.
When I look in your eyes right now, just lit up by the podcasting light, I see Barack.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, of course, the modern word, we don't call it literally the apple of the eye anymore. We call it the pupil, which comes from Latin and didn't appear in English until the 16th century. And it's figurative. So pupil, where did that come from? Well, it's kind of like pupilla. Pupil is, you would say you have a pupil that's learning from you. And that all comes back to that Latin root word, which is pupilla, a little doll. So it means like a boy or a girl. And then and that's because you could see a little man or a little person, right? In the reflection like we were talking about. But then also in the Hebrew, it meant little man. So again, it all comes back to having that reflection in that apple of the eye.
Seeing a little version of yourself.
Yeah, and you want to keep that precious, and it's something you see in a loved one that you're very close to. So if it didn't come from the Bible, though, because we have an antecedent to that, which is there was a book called Liber Regulae Pastoralis.
Bless you.
The Book of Pastoral Rule, or as commonly known in English was Pastoral Care.
Okay.
Now, this is a very old book that was written by Pope Gregory I around the year 590, shortly after his papal inauguration. So the first written record of this comes from a gentleman by the name of Alfred the Great, and he translated this. So I was going to leave it there and just go, okay, this guy Alfred the Great, because we throw around all these old names, but the reason I wanted to look up more about him was the fact that I go, wait a minute, this guy was like a king, but what's he doing translating books?
Yeah, he's also got the Great on his name, which generally you don't find too many people that's attached to that it's used ironically or to like take a dig at him.
That's a great point. And the Great part was actually posthumously awarded to him. I read a really good article by someone named Barbara York, who's a historian, and she writes for History Today. So back in 1999, she wrote an article called "The Most Perfect Man in History?" ? And I was intrigued by that. So I read about this guy, Alfred the Great. So that's why we can put him up here and with Barack.
Wow.
What do you hear about this guy? So, let me, before I get into this, because you're much better with history than me, for somebody that they called maybe the most perfect man in history, do you know much about him?
I have to say I'm drawing a blank, to be honest with you.
Now, if you don't hear much about him, if we were living in England, we'd probably know more about him. He's been used as an example of sort of, I'm trying to think, what's an American example of somebody we look at and go, Okay, that was
I think we've hit 2 of them tonight. Barack Obama and Young Gravy.
True, but kidding aside, I mean, I would say Mr. Imagine if Mr. Rogers was president or something. I can't even think of it because now we look at, Abraham Lincoln, I mean, is maybe along the lines of someone we just go kind of without blame, but even then we go, well, nowadays we have problems with everybody in history, but just briefly, let me tell you about this guy. So back in the 800s, Vikings were wreaking havoc on the Anglo-Saxon provinces. So Northumbria, East Anglia, Mercia had all fallen to the Vikings. The only province left was Wessex. So this guy, Alfred, basically was looking at being wiped out by the Vikings. Right. However, he kept his nerve. He won a decisive victory at the Battle of Edington in 879. So he ends up winning this battle and becomes like this defender of Christian Anglo-Saxon, the Christian Anglo-Saxon people against the pagan Vikings. He ends up starts liberating neighboring areas, and he turns the tide against the Vikings, paving the way for the unity of England. So even though he himself didn't necessarily unify England. Yeah. I mean, if it wasn't for him in history, right, a lot of people would be speaking Viking right now. Yeah. Whatever. So he was awesome in that sense, but here's where he becomes the most kind of perfect man of history. Right. He ended up becoming king, of course, but he set the example where he said people in authority in church or state couldn't be effective unless they were really well educated and walked the walk. So he made, he wouldn't promote anybody unless they studied, they learned,
No, but that's it's almost like more of a meritocracy than a aristocracy with that. You're not getting something because you've earned it due your family, who you're related to. You're going to have to go out there.
So it was a different way of thinking. It wasn't like these. So he said, hey, you've got to be, and children have all got to be educated. So he wrote books. He did translations on his own. I mean, I have a lot of respect. The more I read about this guy, I'm like, this is amazing. Like, he was a scholar and a political leader and a warrior, which makes him sort of that rounded out, perfect guy. Anyway, why am I talking about him so much? Is that he did use the phrase apple of my eye or apple of thine eye. I can't remember the exact line, but he used it in that book that I brought back, that I talked about, the book of pastoral rule. In his translation, he uses that. So we know that phrase was around all the way back then. So there you go, apple of the eye. And one thing I wanted to mention is History Today. So Barbara York, who writes for History Today, correct. I did a little looking on there, and she has not she, but they have a podcast, and it's called History Today Travels Through Time podcast. I gave a little listen to it. It's pretty cool. It's fairly new, and they, like I said, they travel through time and they talk about different people and different things. And it got me thinking about our friend Robert Banquet, who will be doing kind of the same thing. Steve, you've talked to Robert a little more than I have.
I've had the chance to work with him, and he started sending me some recordings that he's putting together. So I would say it's the same vein. True Facts with Robert Banquet. It's the first podcast that's not one of us. Yeah, it's the first non-Scott or Steve podcast, which is exciting to see that growth. I'm disappointed there's not many mentions of animals or Barack Obama or Young Gravy, but again, this is a very new post Young Gravy time for me, so I guess that would make sense.
So do we know when it's coming out yet?
I believe we can make the official announcement right now that True Facts with Robert Banquet will debut on Wednesday, October 9th.
Oh, sweet. So, I can't wait.
Check out Speakses.com. We'll have some links for you there. So you can go ahead and subscribe. But it definitely it's nice to see us be able to expand into history and to kind of travel through time.
Yeah, because I mean, we talk history. Yeah. We talk history a lot, but I'm the first to say I am no history expert, and Steve's a little better than me, but this guy, Robert, he does seem to know. I mean, he knows what he's talking about. So that will be coming out October 9th.
A new podcast from Speakses.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
History.
True Facts with Robert Bankett.
Science.
True Facts with Robert Bankett.
Literature.
True Facts with Robert Bankett.
A new podcast from Speakesies.
True Facts with Robert Bankett.
True Facts with Robert Bankett.
History.
True Facts with Robert Bankett.
Science.
True Facts with Robert Bankett.
Literature.
True Facts with Robert Bankett.
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 To learn more, go to speaksies.com/truefacts. That's speaksies.com/truefacts.
All right, the next one is one that I have been curious about as well, which is the Big Apple.
The Big Apple.
So New York has a lot of nicknames, the Great American Melting Pot, Gotham, the city that never sleeps, but I think the Big Apple, probably the most famous.
Yeah. And it's one that now that you've said it out loud, I've used all the time, really have no idea why New York is called the Big Apple, but it's something that when you say it, everyone knows New York when you hear that.
It's very evocative. I think whenever you start the big something, it's kind of it's kind of cool. And you go through this thing where at first you're like, why would they call it that? And then you just get used to it.
Yeah.
Why is it the Big Apple? I mean, is it just because apples
but it just sticks because you don't think when I'm getting apples that's a horrible example. I've never gone to the store to buy apples. Theoretically, if I went to the store to buy apples, I'm not thinking of New York City as I'm buying apples.
Well, New York actually is the biggest producer of apples, second only to Washington. Mm-hmm. So maybe that has something to do with it.
It could.
It doesn't. It probably doesn't.
Okay.
But it is something that people when you sit around and try to figure out. Now I love that we're doing this one because this is a hotly debated one. So I'm going to give what some of the possible origins are, but what's great about this, we get to talk about this really cool. Well, maybe cool's not the right word. Well, if you like etymology, you might call him cool. But this guy, Barry Popik, who is very interesting cat, who has done the research, and he's sort of like us, but like way better. Like he's put his life like to etymology.
Mm-hmm. He probably doesn't have a beard.
He doesn't have a beard, and he looks like he'd be a librarian. He's actually a judge, and we'll get to Barry, but this is one that he got very passionate about because people were just throwing around ideas of what it was. Do you have any guesses to what the Big Apple comes from? If you know what it is, don't spill the beans.
No.
Okay.
I have no clue.
No clue.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I would think about it, I really, again, also had no clue. So this got popular back in 1971. So this reminds me a little bit of Don't Mess with Texas because Don't Mess with Texas came from the what are they called? The people that...
the anti-littering campaign by the Department of Transportation.
That's right. So it was a government bureau and sort of like this where the New York Convention and Visitors Bureau wanted to encourage tourism. And so this was a time in 1971, New York was frankly dirty and riddled with crime.
Right.
And not a place people really wanted to come see like they do now.
Yep.
And one of the things they did was that let's from a branding standpoint, it's probably one of the most brilliant branding slogans ever. They decided to call it the Big Apple. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of gave you this visual, right? Oh, Big Apple, big juicy apple. I want to come be there and whatever that, even though just subconsciously, you're not going to come bite a Big Apple, but it sounds,
you don't sound scared away by even someone like me who's fairly fruit phobic would be.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a lot of people that just thought, hey, Visitors Bureau just came up with this. It got interesting a few years ago in the early days of the internet. A website came up that claimed that, okay, the etymology is in on this website. It was I think it was 2004. And they said it has to do with this French lady back in the 1800s in New York who started a brothel, and she got the nickname Eve.
Okay.
And she thought it was really funny, so she kind of went with that, and it became known for folks to come to the Big Apple, which was her brothel, and that then sort of spread as broader and as a New York.
And that makes a lot more sense, especially in the context of what New York was like in the 70s, which I think, I did say trap music like somebody's dad, so I will say the young people don't remember New York.
No.
Of what it was in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And even my first time visiting there was in the early 90s, where it was getting cleaned up, but still was not all the way there yet. To the point that there were certain areas my dad and I, when we were visiting there, didn't go.
Yeah,
just because.
And the evidence of that is watch any movie from the 70s or 80s or early 90s, as Steve said, that are set in New York, and there's a lot of them. What's the thing they do every single time? They put you in some. Think about the movie Big. You remember that was New York? Was that New York or Chicago? Now that I think of it,
I'm not sure.
It doesn't matter. The point is, there was a trope where you'd go to New York City, you'd be in this little rat-infested motel room, and what would you hear? Gunshots, sirens, somebody screaming.
Well, even to the point in the early 80s that one of our favorite actors, Kurt Russell, did Escape from New York, which the premise of the movie, by the time 1999 rolled around, that New York was converted into a giant prison city.
I think that's verbatim what it says at the beginning of the movie. Yeah. So this actually makes more sense that there's this lady Eve, and the clients were called Eve's Apples. And so it has had this unsavory sexual connotation to it. This became sort of the leading theory, much like many of our theories. It's weirdly satisfying because it rings sort of true. You go, I can see that happening, but it is not true. It's actually a hoax, and it's a hoax that made Barry Popik very mad, and I can't wait to read you some of his quotes about this one. So we'll get to that one. There's another theory that says after the crash, the Wall Street crash in 1929, a lot of out of work, finance guys, started selling apples on the street because, again, as I mentioned before, there actually is New York does produce a ton of apples, and I'm sure there were people doing that, but I don't know. I don't know that really. I don't know if I'm in 1971 in the Visitors Bureau. I don't know that I'm going to take either of those and want to spread that as my tourism deal. So one thing we do know, so I'm going to start kind of working backwards till we get to it, is that jazz musicians. So we talked about jazz in the past when we talked about all that jazz, and a lot of slang and a lot of words did come through jazz. So there was a couple things with that. Okay, one was there was a dance called the Big Apple. Now, this is true. So in jazz circles back in the 30s, there was a slang for a gig that was called an apple. Well, this part is what people say, and it doesn't ring true, which is like, but if you're going to get a big gig, you'd say, I'm going to the Big Apple. Right. There's no bigger place to play. We do know that the Big Apple was used in jazz circles, but it had to do with a dance. And I want to read you a quote from Mae West.
Always quotable Mae West.
Yeah, exactly. So she was born in Brooklyn. And if you don't know who Mae West is, she's worth taking a deep dive online to find out a little bit more about her. Yeah. Watch some of her old roles. But she was a playwright, screenwriter, comedian, and probably most remembered as being a sex symbol back in the proverbial day. So she goes on a ventriloquist Edgar Bergen's radio show, and this is great because it was the Chase and Sanborn Hour, and this is in 1937. And West did a sketch that was called Adam and Eve, and she played Eve, and she told the snake to go get the apple tree and get an apple, and she goes, "Now get me a big one. I feel like doing a big apple." And the reference was to the Big Apple Dance, which was a craze in 1937, and everybody went nuts when they heard this line. Of course, I don't remember if it was the FCC, but like that got shut down because it was much too much of a sexual innuendo there. So there was the dance. Okay, but where did the dance come from? Not sure. Walter Winchell, who you've probably heard of.
Yeah, famous gossip columnist, I believe.
Yes, and we're moving back. So in 1927, he has a quote where he says, "To the lonely and aspiring hoofer, the fanny-falling comedian, Broadway is the Big Apple, the main stem and goal of all ambition." So he's using it in that context that we kind of use it. So sort of like the jazz thing. Hey, there's a gig in New York. You're going to make it out to the Big Apple. Yeah. He's saying Broadway's the Big Apple.
Yeah, but more positive, not as much of a double entendre as Eve's Apples.
That's right. None of that stuff. I think it was probably used in all these ways.
Right.
So etymologists are trying to figure out where'd this come from.
So where does Barry come out on this? If I'm jumping the gun on that.
Nope, you're right on time because we're getting right now to Barry. So Barry Popik is an etymologist. He wears a lot of hats. Mm-hmm. And he became obsessed with this, and he had a chance meeting with a gentleman in a library in New York City, Gerald Cohen, who tells him the story. So Barry Popik's in there, pouring through articles trying to find where did this thing come from, and this guy goes, "Oh yeah, I know where that came from. Mm-hmm. It was this. It all comes back to, drum roll please, horse racing."
Yes.
So. Man, horse racing had a lot to do with
it. Did
everything, it seems like. But so this guy, John J. Fitzgerald, wrote a column in the Old New York Morning Telegraph. Okay. He later renamed it Around the Big Apple. And this was first used in 1921. So this is our first. So when Barry found this, he was like, oh my gosh, this is like a decade before, or at least 6 years before anyone else used it, because Walter Winchell used it in 1927. This is 1921. And here's the explanation that he has, which is that he overheard these young men that were working on horses, and they were talking about, hey, we're going to get a chance to race our horse in the Big Apple. He goes, and there's only one Big Apple, and that's New York. So the horse racing community would call these races an apple. So it was like you get a bite at the apple sort of deal. Right. And you can go all over the place, but the Big Apple, the big contest, the big race is in New York. So he uses that, and he broadens it over the course of his column. He starts referring to New York in general as the Big Apple. So Popik finds this and is very happy with himself, and he goes, "Okay, I've got it. I'm gonna go share this with everybody." So Barry Popik has a website now. Like, he's still with us. He's still doing the Lord's work. He also found out. So he's sort of a etymology Hall of Famer here. Okay. He figured out the Big Apple. He figured out where the Windy City came from. Okay. And hot dog. Man. And these were all ones that were much debated, and people thought. So if you read articles from pre-Barry Popik, they're like, we'll never know. It's just something people used to say. They said it with jazz. We don't know exactly why. He actually found these old articles. He had to dig through a million of them. Did the same thing with Windy City and hot dog. But I want to read you some of his. He was so mad. So I went to his website. Right. He has a whole website that literally is, you wouldn't believe how much content there is on the Big Apple that's on his website. Mm-hmm. And he called it the Big Apple Whore Hoax. Was invented by Peter Sawin's website in 1995. And he goes on, and he goes, he's admitted, I've confronted him, and he's admitted that it's all a joke. He goes, it is a disgrace that this is on the web, even more of a disgrace that it comes up first in search engines. And so he goes, if you click on this link to see this guy's hoax website, come back and refresh mine 10 times so that this becomes a better, because this, I like that. This is back in like 2004 when he made this. Mm-hmm. But he is ticked. And then he's like confronting people. I found these other links where this guy who wrote an article about the Big Apple didn't mention the Fitzgerald guy. And so he writes in and goes, why would you not mention this? This is the most important, so he takes it very seriously. Good. He gets mad. He's like an angry etymologist.
I like an angry etymologist. You don't see too many.
I thought you would like this guy. Yeah. So I wanted to bring that up. And just a couple more stray facts before we finish up talking about the Big Apple. One of them is it was not the first fruit that New York was named after. It was initially referred to as New Orange. And I bet you can guess why.
I will, because they were, let's see if I can put this together, because they were originally New Amsterdam, which is in the Netherlands, where William the Orange is actually their one of their most respected Dutch persons.
Yes,
of all
that's
time.
exactly right.
Oh my gosh.
So good job, Steve.
And that
You
wasn't
must have been hanging
pre-planned.
out with Robert Banquet. No, that was not. That was not pre-planned.
I like some William the Orange.
Yeah, so it was called New Orange in 1673 when the Dutch captured New York. So we get to bring horse racing in. We get to bring the Dutch in.
We get a newspaper putting a term into circulation. This is all. This is all kind of hitting it for us.
Yeah, so I feel like this one is fun. And last but not least, I'll say for me, what I think of is the home run apple. Do you know about the home run apple? Of course you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suffer as a Nationals fan, so I've seen it going up.
Right. So we don't need to spend a lot of time on this. If you're a baseball fan, you know Shea Stadium. There was an assistant general manager back in 1980, I think it was, that had this idea to create this apple that would come up out of the actually came out of a top hat back in the day. And it would say Mets Magic. So Shea Stadium is where the Mets play home games. Whenever a home run was hit, which was very infrequent back then, the apple would come up. They later changed Mets Magic to say home run apple. Mm-hmm. Now they're in Citi Field. They were going to get rid of the thing, but Mets fans said, no, we need it. But so they built a bigger one, a big old apple that's still there, which frankly, I think is cool. I like the apple.
It's a good tradition.
I'll pose a trivia question to you, Steve. Again, not prepared, so this will be hard, but so the Mets apple has only been raised for Mets players in its whole history, except for one opposing player. Right, any guesses? This is hard.
So,
but think about, who do you think of hitting home runs and the home run apple comes up?
Okay, so I'm going to think it's a former Met. I'm thinking it's going to be the straw that stirs the drink.
You are absolutely right.
Yeah.
Nice job.
Darryl Strawberry.
So Darryl Strawberry was playing for the Yankees. He was a beloved Met, a troubled but beloved Met.
Yeah.
And he is who I think about. And again, it's two different fruits, but you think strawberry and you think the apple.
William and he hit orange. It's all coming around.
Exactly. Now, they partially raised it, though, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah.
They just raised it enough. They didn't for the Mets not to come up.
The full thing. Yeah.
But it was like a tip of the cap. So that's it. That's the Big Apple.
Very good. Well, thank you, Barry Popik. And I think we have a new hero to add to our etymologists that we respect and look for. And, we have Alfred the Great, maybe Barry the Great. Maybe
Alfred, the thing about Alfred is he's sort of like his breadth of work doesn't seem to be as great, but he did a lot of things. He ran for office in New York. I can't remember what it was, but he's a judge. He did all these things, but he also found time to get real angry about,
and that's maybe the most important thing, is he was angry. I respect that.
Yeah. So read more about him. Okay, one more, and this is going to be the last one. And I thought we should bring this one up because episode 7, way back, one of our first episodes, we talked about Paint the Town Red, and one of the guys we talked about ended up being one of our favorite guys. And again, I think what we said in the episode is, as long as we didn't have to hang around him, we really liked him.
He's one of those guys that's a lot of fun as long as he's not your next door neighbor or like your brother-in-law. You don't want to have to deal with him. And you don't want to hang out with him on Thanksgiving.
Right. So this guy, the Mad Marquis, he, again, I'm going to read a little bit of his description because it's so great. And first of all, he's known as, and this is reading this thing from the township of Melton Mowbray in, I don't know if you say Lister or Leicester. It's kind of like saying Worcestershire sauce, but Leicester, England.
Yep.
So in the 18th century, he terrorized this town, and he's known as a reprobate and landowner, which is, I like the order they put that in. And just a little snippet, he had an uncontrolled sense of humor. It amused him to challenge passersby to fight him, to break windows, to upset apple carts. He painted the Melton Mowbray toll bar red. He fought a duel. He painted the heels of Parsons' horse with aniseed and hunted him with bloodhounds. So, but in there, he talks about upsetting the apple cart. So since we're talking about apples, let's really quickly, this will be a short one, but what does that mean? Where does it come from? The obvious one is a literal. And so I think at the time we said, well, maybe that's where that comes from, was this guy upsetting apple carts. And, that is something too that that, I mean, if you think of somebody upsetting the apple cart, Steve, what does that mean to you? Like if you hear that, I don't know that you use it every day, but maybe you do.
I think it's taking the way things should be.
Yeah, it's like
things should be going a certain way. The apple cart should have the apples in it, and it's also, when you think of an apple cart too, that's something, it can't be, you can't jostle it but so much before things start to go.
Yeah.
So it's something that's a delicate situation that when you upset it, and it's got to be frustrating too to have apples go through, like it's like watching a football bounce. It's not going to bounce the way you want.
That's right.
So it's taking the status quo and upsetting it.
It's like, don't rock the boat, don't upset the apple cart.
The results are going to be pretty upsetting to whoever owns the apple cart.
And now that I think of it, upsetting the apple cart has been used to comedic effect many times in movies. If I think, I feel like there's Jackie Chan movie or something, running through town. Oh, the apple cart gets turned over. That's more not a cart, but a stand.
Yeah, but it's kind of like the genesis also of the guys walking down the street with eggs or a giant plane of glass.
Yeah, exactly. It's just funny. But there's a little something more to this. So I wanted to throw out some quick reasons where this came from. So the first time you hear it used is in 1788. It's this guy named Jeremy Belknap. In the History of New Hampshire, he says, quote, Adams had almost overset the apple cart by intruding an amendment of his own fabrication on the morning of the day of the ratification. So we know in 1788 this thing was being used. In 1800, there is a source that says the original intent, and here's where we get to the actual intent of this phrase, is an apple cart was wrestler's slang.
Yes.
For the body, and you'd say down with his apple cart meant to throw a man down. So Steve, we brought wrestling into this for you too.
We brought it back. We have some kayfabe almost too. You're not going to say throw him down. You're going to give a code word there.
That's right. Down with his apple cart. So the apple cart actually was used sort of like we'd call, like you get hit in the bread basket.
Yeah.
It's sort of used as a part of the body. Mm-hmm. So when people talked about having their apple cart upset, it meant that they basically had fallen down or been pushed down. The apple cart was sort of like your upper body. Mm-hmm. So also in 1788, the same year that Jeffrey Belknap used it, Francis Gross recorded in the Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue, which we've referenced many times, that, quote, down with his apple cart meant to knock a man down. So one of the best uses of this I saw was from 1833 in the Sydney Gazette from Australia. It says, quote, I guess this story, I don't know what was going on. This is Australia in 1830. I can't imagine.
There's kangaroos and boomerangs.
Yeah, exactly. It says, quote, he slapped her face, she seized a broomstick, and he capsized her apple cart and broke 2 panels of the door. Capsized her apple cart. Yeah, I like that one too.
And that sounds like a euphemism Young Gravy could maybe
put in
his rotation of songs.
So so the apple cart was a part of the body. It meant you got knocked down. There is one of these ones where they say, actually, did you know that the Romans had an expression, peri plaustrum perculi, which means, it translates to, I am undone, I have upset my cart. So it kind of gives, again, this idea of a cart being upset.
I'm surprised that it means pretty consistently throughout history, calling someone's body an apple cart. To me, just an apple cart seems like something that's really wobbly and could fall over. I mean, actually, it's a good description of me.
It is a good description. Well, it's definitely a good description of me, but it's a good description of us. And the apple cart, the body holds the apples, which are in your eye. Mm-hmm. So there you go, the apple of the eye. Somehow, maybe that all ties together.
I think it does.
So we'll pretend that it all does. So it didn't come from the Mad Marquise, but everyone sort of thought about it this way. It becomes used more broadly as time goes on. Mm-hmm. There are some quotes I won't read, but basically there are a bunch of quotes that you can find through the years where there's like a book about raising kids, and they talk about, a child has fallen down. He's upset his apple cart. So he's upset, and it just means things aren't going the way the kid wants to go. And then you start hearing these quotes about, my plan didn't go as it was supposed to go, but it sort of moves from you fell down, a child falling down, being upset, into somebody not getting their way or having their plan being seen to fruition. So that's our Apple episode.
I think it's great that we have Barry Popik now to look to put on our Mount Rushmore with William Shakespeare, John Haywood, Guy Fieri, and also too, especially now as we've entered the age of young gravy. I think it's a good way to get off to a good start.
I agree.
This is Steve. Thank you very much for listening to Origin of Species. We appreciate your listening to our show, and thank you very much for all the support you guys provide us. Speaking of support, we would love it if you would leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast provider of your choice. You're also welcome to write a review for us, to say something nice, especially about me. I have a very low self-esteem, and frankly, I need the positive attention. It's good for me. Also, if you're in the Richmond, Virginia area, Young Gravy is playing at the National on Monday, September 23rd. I won't be there. Or will I? Also, please make sure to check out our other Species podcast. Currently, we have Personal Records, where Scott interviews a new guest every episode and discusses music that is near and dear to them. In addition, coming on October 9th, we have our newest podcast, True Facts with Robert Banquette. If you enjoy history, if you enjoy laughter, you will enjoy this podcast. You can find both of these podcasts by searching for Species at the podcast provider of your choice. Thank you again for listening to Origin of Species. Thank you for your support. Thank you for the 5-star reviews. And if you see Young Gravy, tell him Steve says hi. She wanted to give me the business.